This episode is brought to you by 10 Yetis Digital. We started using these guys at the beginning of the year and we've had great results. They're an online public relations agency that manage influencer marketing campaigns, social media campaigns, design. They do design, and they cover sort of multiple sectors, brands big and small. Highly recommended. That's 10yetis.co.uk. Welcome to the Tech Leaders Podcast. This interview was one of the most enjoyable that I've done thus far. This guy is so interesting. It's an incredible story. He grew up in a war-torn area of northern India in the 80s. He pursued a career in physics, which got him out of that situation, and via Singapore he had a bit of a career shift towards software testing and ended up in the legendary Nokia operation in Finland in the 90s, which was an incredible story. And he learned some amazing things, which he then took forward into his entrepreneurial endeavours, which came later in his career. Had a bit of a baptism of fire with a failed venture initially, and then moved on to an extremely successful venture where he got acquired, his organisation got acquired by Apple within 18 months of starting up, and he's taken these extreme experiences and everything else forward into his new venture, which is Prowler.io, based down in Cambridge, doing some incredible things around artificial intelligence. It's a fantastic story, full of value, full of lessons. Really, it's a great conversation. It's Vishal Chatrath. Vishal, appreciate you coming on the show. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Gareth, for the invitation. Really happy to be here.
So let's just talk a little bit. Well, let's just start by, if you could just give us a little overview of a little summary of your career. You've obviously, I can see you've had a very decorated career. You've been involved in a lot of businesses. It'd be great to just get a summary of that sort of journey from the point of education right up to where you are right now.
Yeah. So I, as you can tell, I grew up in India, in the northwestern part of India, in the state of Punjab, and I studied a bit in my hometown, longer part of it in a boarding school, and then did my first degree in India before I went to Singapore on a research scholarship. So I think it's a bit important to understand the context of the time I was growing up in. Of course, being a child of the 70s when I was born, and specifically the time in the early 80s to 1990, Punjab was going through quite tough times. We had a insurgency movement where in those 6 years from 84 to 1990, 12,000 people lost their lives, right? Wow. So in that time, hearing machine gun fire every day and guns and bullets flying around and bombs going off.
Was that because sorry to interrupt, there was a war with, was it Pakistan then, was it?
There wasn't a war. I think kind of Pakistan, as you know, has a bit of a history of supporting insurgency kind of movements in India. In Punjab. So I think it was one of those, and it was quite a tough time in the sense that I lost basically members of my family and friends and so on and so forth. So I think that sets the context on when you grow up, and you go through the various experiences. That sort of gives you basically benchmark on when you have challenges. You set those challenges against the context of how you grew up, right? So.
Absolutely.
For me, when faced with challenges, the first question I ask, am I alive? It's all right. Nobody's shooting at me. Not too bad. And I think hence, basically positions yourself. And also growing up in India in the 1990s, early 1990s, that was prior to the time the Indian economy had opened up. So a natural thing for us to do when we did our bachelor's degree in India, just because of the dearth of jobs, was to try and get a research scholarship, or actually try to get a scholarship to do your master's, so you could go and work elsewhere in India, sort of elsewhere in the world.
Yeah.
And those times, given the value of the Indian rupee and like the typical, where things were, there was no way my family could afford for me to go and study in Singapore. So the 1 year's school fees for a master's course in an American university would have meant that my mom would have had to kind of sell her house and everything that she owned, and still we couldn't pay 1 year's fees, in a university abroad.
Yeah.
So I think that sort of set the context of growing up against basically challenges and knowing that's what you need to do, that's what you need to do,
Mhm.
and whatever the circumstances is, that's what you got to do, right? So
Yeah.
once you decide you want to do something, you just make sure you do it.
Absolutely. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's a good grounding to come from, though. You clearly obviously had a tough upbringing in that almost war-like environment,
Yeah.
and I suppose that gave you a hunger then, which you took into your career to just push yourself forward and make the most of your opportunity. Is that fair to say, Vishal?
Yeah, and I think also puts things into context. I think it helps you to stay calm, in the sense that when a lot of things are kind of flying around, and lots of new changes are happening in the environment, and let's take COVID, right? So a lot of bad things are happening. A lot of people are losing their lives, a lot of bad things. But I think gives you a chance to kind of really step back. That in all this news of things that are not going so well, what is going well, and you latch onto that,
Absolutely.
right? And in those undercurrents which are still going positive, you focus on those, and you use those as the wind in your sails to take yourself and your organization forward.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good philosophy.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm sure that's probably been with you throughout your career, I suppose. Yeah.
Yeah.
So you went to university in Singapore. Talk us about that through that experience then, because 95 to 2001 you were there. That was an interesting time for Singapore, wasn't it? They were going over to sort of independent. Well, obviously they had independence from the UK in the 50s, didn't they? But I think that in the 90s they really kicked on as an economic powerhouse, didn't they?
That's absolutely right. Yeah. So I went there in 95. I was on a research scholarship to do a PhD. So growing up, in India with the limited books that I had, I stumbled into Richard Feynman's book, and I always thought I wanted to go deep into physics. I went to physics via engineering for various reasons. And I went there, and I think very early on, we were about 13 research scholars in the lab. And within the next 12, 18, 24 months, it became very clear to me that I wasn't really the deep kind of physics kind of a guy. My interests were too broad than to go, very narrow in. So I negotiated with my supervisor to go part-time. So I left, and in 97 started to work for Hewlett Packard and started to do my research part-time. And I should have gotten my degree much earlier, actually 1998, 1999. I submitted my thesis before I moved to Finland. And then I was waiting for my degree for the next few years, and I wrote back to the university, and they had lost my thesis. So I had to resubmit my thesis, and eventually I got my degree in 2001 for the work I had finished long before.
Don't tell me you had to rewrite it. You had a backup copy, yeah?
Yeah, I had a backup copy, but in those days, things were not so sophisticated, and because I was doing a lot of experiments, so there were all sorts of photographs all over the place, and I had to digitize them of samples. It was quite a painful process to have to get my thesis reprinted. Yeah.
Right. Okay. Oh dear. I bet you weren't particularly happy with them after they lost that.
No, I wasn't. But I think to your question, Singapore at that time, you're absolutely right. It was a big change, because Singapore was moving from what I would say a low value manufacturing to high value manufacturing. This was the time when electronics manufacturing became very big. I started my career in Hewlett Packard, but even more than that, semiconductor manufacturing became a very big thing.
Yes.
And you had these big companies like CSM, etc. And that was the time where the model was coming about in the semiconductors of basically foundries, where a lot of companies designed the chips but did not manufacture the chips, and they were just outsourced to large companies whose job was to manufacture the chips but not really design the chips, right? So kind of contract manufacturers, and we have some big Taiwanese companies in that space now. I mean, apart from Intel, I don't know of very many sort of companies who manufacture their own chips these days.
Well, ARM outsourced is the other big chip provider, isn't it? ARM, I think, but they outsource theirs to, I think.
ARM is completely outsourced. So ARM provides the like the framework designs for them. And if say somebody like Qualcomm was to build a chip, then they would take that design, they would kind of design the chip, but for the fabrication of that chip, they would again subcontract it to one of these foundries.
Yeah, of course. Okay, so moving on then to, you ended up going to Finland. Strange move, but I mean, not strange move actually. It was actually an amazing move, because you went to the legendary late 90s Nokia operation, which was the global behemoth in mobile phones at the time. That must have been an exciting move for you as a young engineer, young test engineer going there.
Yeah. So if you were in Singapore at that time, it was a very strange move. Because kind of mobile phones were kind of popular, but not that popular in actually 1998 when I first started to talk to Nokia. And my interest of moving to Finland wasn't so much from a mobile phone and a direct career perspective. It was more down to the fact that I was in Singapore, which is very hot and humid. I come from the north of India, which is cold and dry in the winter, and very dry weather. I didn't like the weather at all. So I wanted to move to a cold place. And I just decided that I was so fed up of the heat, I will try to get a job as north as possible on this planet.
Yeah. So and you would just wanted to walk around with nice jackets on and big, nice winter hats, did you?
Yeah. So I was really looking for the most extreme change. And when I first contacted Nokia, they were trying to convince me to look for a job in Helsinki, where most of the Nokia facilities were, or in Tampere, or in like the cities in the southern part of Finland. And I found a job listing on the Nokia website in a place called Haukipudas, which I couldn't find on the map. So in those days, there was no Google Maps. You had to use an atlas. So in my atlas, I couldn't find Haukipudas. And that's where I made a decision that I'm going to move to Haukipudas. And it took another 6 months of convincing Nokia to interview me, and another few months for them to agree for me to visit Haukipudas.
Yeah.
It was in March 99.
So Haukipudas, it's obviously where Nokia's head office was, or is.
Nokia's head office, yeah. Nokia's head office is in Espoo, or used to be in Espoo, which is close to Helsinki, which is in the south. Haukipudas is 800 kilometers north of Helsinki. Wow. It's like properly north. It's about 100 kilometers south of Lapland.
Good God! So are we? Is it so far north the days are shorter and things like that? Are we talking like a couple of hours of sunlight a day in the winter and things?
Yeah, in the peak of winter, you're talking about 2 or 2.5 hours of sunlight.
So that is an enormous cultural and climate, and it's a different world, is it, to what you were used to growing up in northern India and then living in Singapore. You had a big cultural sort of awakening to the extremes, didn't you? I suppose in the early part of your career. Well, what did you learn from that then?
I learned that it's unbelievable what the human body can handle, and even more importantly, what the human mind can handle.
Yeah. So
there is nothing. If you have not seen the Arctic, there's nothing that can mentally or physically prepare you for the Arctic. It is beautifully strange, and it's very strange to anything that you've actually grown up with. So you have to unlearn everything. And the other bit is it also teaches you how to survive and work through first principles, right? Because there is nothing that is familiar, and you really break everything down to first principles, and based on that you make a decision. For example, Finland has the Finnish language, which has no relation to any of the other Latin-based languages.
It's a bit of an outlier, isn't it? I hear it may have some relation to Hungarian for some weird reason, but I mean, apart from that, it's nothing like the other Scandinavian languages, is it? Which is quite.
Yeah, you're right. It's unlike any other language. Estonian is probably the closest, which is almost Finnish. With Hungarian, some people claim. I have a very close Hungarian friend of mine who lived with me when I was in Oulu, in North Finland, close to Haukipudas. And he had been living there for 2 years. And I asked him that, how close is Hungarian to Finnish? He says, well, in the 2 years, he's just found one word in common, and it means completely different things.
There we go then. Yeah, it's funny though. I mean, we don't really know how some of these languages are linked, but I heard a couple of years ago that obviously I'm from Wales, and there's a language up here, Welsh.
That's right.
Goes to Welsh school, and I hear that there's a relation between because Welsh is a very old language, and they don't. I don't think nobody really knows the full origins of it, but I mean, apparently it's quite close. It's related to Sanskrit, which is an Indian language, which is quite bizarre, and that shows you how far back it does go. So yeah. But I mean, I find the history of language quite interesting, actually.
Yeah, and Welsh is a beautiful language. I was in Llandudno a few years ago with my family. Yeah, and then we heard people speak Welsh in restaurants, and it was just so beautiful to listen. Yeah.
You don't want to get too close, though. You might get spat on. There's lots of consonants. There's a lot of stuff going on there with the tongue, isn't it? But yeah, it's an unusual language. So anyway, so we digress. But anyway, Finland. So you obviously learned from that experience. Then culturally, it obviously made you. You must have grown up a lot.
That's right.
Really different.
Yeah, I think Finland was a very, very good experience. One of the most, basically foundational and one of the best learning experiences, because what you really get to learn that a place so extreme and so different, that how similar people are around the world and how their concerns are, how people feel the same things, and they care about the same things, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And but also at the same time, how in harsh environments do people take care of each other and think about each other. So one interesting example, actually two of them. One, I remember when I bought my flat there, so the front door of my flat was all glass, and I remember asking the property agent that, could I get the door replaced? She said, why? And I said, well, it's glass, somebody could break in. And then she asked me, but why would somebody want to break in? Right? So it was that sort of a place where, and then it slowly dawned to me that, okay, why that was the case is because in a place where you have very good social security, there are no homeless people, everybody's taken care of. Of course, there are high taxes. With my high taxes, I bought safety for myself and my family because, nobody has any reason, because even if a person is unemployed, he can have a perfectly good standard of living. And there's no reason for them to break into my house.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think, it's difficult. The Scandinavian countries seem to have got, politically they're very stable. They seem to have a really, like Finland. I tell you what, have you ever read about the education system in Finland?
Oh yes, very much.
It's incredible, isn't it? Because they just to give the listeners some context, I have brought this up on a previous podcast, and I'm sure you probably know more than me, Vishal, but just so correct me if I'm wrong. But they had one of the, it wasn't one of the top performing education systems in Europe or certainly all the world. And they basically looked at their structure and their methodology, and they completely turned it on its head. And they stopped doing homework. They placed more emphasis on physical education, doing things that the children's supposed to be doing, messing around with stuff, getting into climbing stuff and all that, and just focused on when children are actually more likely to be able to learn, and homed in and made the most of that part of the day, and then didn't try to force other stuff on them when they probably should be having a bit of mental downtime. And lo and behold, a couple of years later, they get the best education system in the world, but nobody has followed them. Nobody has followed that trend. So it's crazy. But we all stuck with this 200-year-old dated education system, which was, set up to prepare people for manufacturing jobs, essentially. So yeah.
I think you're 100% right. So I think the key philosophy there is that the children should be taught when they are ready to learn. And also the notion of how you teach is so different. Because here in the UK, of course, we see the difference with our daughter, that here the education is a lot more kind of a top-down.
Yeah.
Like you are sort of given material to absorb. And I think that's not the best way to learn. You only learn when you have to struggle and strive through things. So you are given an idea and you are allowed to explore. And in that process, there is frustration, there is struggle. And that's where you learn.
Yes.
And that's true for your career, that's true through life.
Yeah, because in a way, comfort is toxic, isn't it? Do you know what I mean? Like, you're talking about hardship. people like in harsh environments, people are more collaborative, they're more resourceful, they're more innovative, but you give them comfort, and that kind of goes away, and people start becoming a little bit more irritable. And from someone like you coming up from an environment where you've been, bullets have been flying past your house, you must get a bit disillusioned with people in this country sometimes who don't really know how good they got it. Do you think is that a fair point?
I think it's a very fair point. I wish I had been able to put it so well as you put it, that comfort is toxic, and I'm actually proof of that. I wouldn't have moved to Finland if I liked comfort, because I personally find comfort very uncomfortable. So my life in Singapore was very comfortable, and hence I moved to Finland. so I guess if there's a regular or a common theme in my life, it is to look for the next thing to do and the next thing to put my mind to. If things are going too stable and too normal, I get very uncomfortable. I can't sleep well at night if everything's going okay. If I have plenty of things to deal with, I sleep very well.
Yes. No, I completely can empathize with and relate to that. I think, as with everything, though, it is about balance, isn't it? You can hit that point of diminishing returns, I think, on you, and whereby it becomes just pure stress then. But everyone needs to find that biting point. Right. As you get more experience, the biting point kind of raises. You can take on more and more, can't you? It's a fascinating subject. I mean, we could go in all sorts of directions with this one, I suppose. But let's get back on track, I suppose. So I want to talk about Nokia. What were you had a couple of different roles in there. It was a really interesting time in the history of the company. What kind of milestones did you hit? What career milestones did you hit in Nokia? Which, what were your biggest lessons from it, and what pushed you on into the direction you're going in now? I'm assuming it was a crucial time in your career, the time you spent there.
Well, absolutely. And I think one of the great things about Nokia when I went there in 99, that this was before the big spurt in the growth, right? This was more of the foundational, bearing time. And then I think 99, 2000, 2001, and the next 5 years, just massive spurt in growth.
Yeah.
And because the company was growing so fast and there were so many things to do, you were just, you could just pick up as much work as you basically felt like. Of course, you had your day job, but you were just free to explore, and nobody stopped you from doing something that needed to be done just because if it wasn't your job. And this is also the time when Nokia was introducing a lot of courses, online training, and so on and so forth. So if you had that thirst and hunger for knowledge, and the drive to do things, you could just explore as much as you wanted. And then Nokia also had this very good flat Scandinavian, because the Scandinavian society is very flat and egalitarian, and then it reflects in the culture. So there's no issue of going to some senior manager and just having a chat, and they were all very approachable. So it was a very different world.
Yeah.
So the key lessons there was, like, first of all, I was very lucky with my managers, where I'm not sure if you've heard about the Finns, that they don't really like to talk to each other too much. They're very quiet, right? So so in terms of the management style, it was, you had your broad task, and you just were just allowed to get along with it. And if your manager didn't talk to you for a month, 2 months, 3 months, there was no problem, because there was this trust. If you trusted, if the more the manager trusted you, the less he would talk to you.
Yeah,
right?
Of course. Yeah.
You would just, so I used to see my managers, once every 6 months or something like that. We just kind of, sort of got along.
Yeah, just let you get on with it.
Yeah, and in that time, was a time of, a lot of things were happening. Nokia was making sort of M&As, and every 6 months or so, I used to be assigned to some new project, somewhere where almost like if there was some firefighting to be done, or if something that somebody couldn't do or did not want to do, being a junior engineer, I used to be just asked, do you want to do that? And my way of making decisions is not why I should do it. The question I ask myself is, like, why not? Right?
Okay.
So I end up doing so many different things which were not really related to my day job. So I learned a lot. And on one of those kind of situations, I ended up in California for about 6 months, where Nokia acquired a company. And this was just after 9/11, just Actually, the company was acquired before 9/11 happened, and then this sort of company had quite a lot of quality problems. And their manufacturing location was in Boise, Idaho.
Right.
And Boise, Idaho, if you know of the American kind of a redneck country, it's like way there.
Yeah.
Right?
In the middle of nowhere.
And it was an interesting time in just after September the 11th to end up as a South Asian in a place which was very different, and to be the odd guy out, right?
Right.
And in a factory that's having lots of challenges, to be sent by Nokia to go and help them. And so kind of, let's put it this way, the starting chemistry wasn't the best.
Yeah.
And I still recall going into the cafeteria in Boise, and you had these magazines, and they only had two kinds of magazines in that cafeteria: hunting and guns. And so how to go there, build that trust, work with them, where there was pretty tough relationship between Nokia and this contract manufacturer. There's been months of blame game sort of going around. And I was seen as this Nokia guy, the spy who had come to check what was going on and everything.
You just immediately met with suspicion, I take it then, yeah?
Yes, big time. I think just kind of putting it, basically mildly, and just to turn over that hostility into cooperation and get things done over the next 6 months was a big learning experience.
No, I can imagine it was. Yeah. So how did that play out then? Did you leave that assignment feeling like it was a success? Did you turn the opinion around, do you think?
Yeah. So when I went there, I think the quality and the sort of production level was way lower, and I think we had a massive kind of a turnaround and a massive success over the next few months. And it was really down to the fact that we and the team in Boise, we were able to sit down, break the kind of barriers, build that trust, and just be very open, and I just kind of told the guys, listen, I'm here. I have no clue how your factory runs. I'm just trying to figure out, this is what my problem is. This is what I need to achieve. I'm not here to take over your job. I need to get back to Finland. And, how do we go about? And of course, a big part of the distrust had also built up with the way the past communications had gone.
Yeah.
So to kind of hear them out, and in the beginning, their hostility towards me wasn't really hostility towards me, but it was more of a basically pent-up frustration that manifested itself as hostility towards me. So it was important for me to understand that and sort of recognize that behavior towards me was not personal. It was, the source of it was something else.
Of course, yeah.
I just happened to be representing Nokia, and hence I was getting all this blowback.
Yeah, you were just you were kind of the fall guy, essentially. When you were the facade of the entity that they didn't have much love for at that time, But but I mean, being met with such resistance, I suppose, that and obviously you got through that. That must have brought given you some skills and strengths which made you stronger going forward. That's a great little story. But so I just wanted to move on after that. Then you left Nokia. Did you leave and go back, or did you?
Yeah. So I was in California for 6 months, and after that I came back to North Finland, this Oulu Hokipadas area, and then I was still an engineer. And then around 2004, 2005, I moved to Helsinki area in my first job in technology marketing, which was more of a business development role, where I moved into a team which had just been set up to help support the smartphone business. So this was the time when smartphones had just been invented. And this was a very small team, and the team was put together to support the major mobile operators to help them adopt smartphones. And being the most junior member of the team, everybody else went to all the, like the glamorous accounts like Vodafone and Orange and all those big accounts. And, And this was the time when there were no smartphones in China, and there was this Chinese operator called China Mobile and China Unicom. And because nobody wanted to kind of touch China because there were no phones being sold, this was not a glory account. So they threw me into to take care of China or head the China account directors. And when I asked the manager in charge that why was I put to China, and he says, well, Vishal is from Asia, China is in Asia, so you can take care of Asia. So there's a slight difference between India and China.
It is a massive difference.
So there I was, and I booked a flight to Beijing and landed up, met the account director. I said, here I am. I've been asked to help you. I have no idea what I'm supposed to do. Tell me. And that was the beginning of probably one of the most fruitful relationships in my entire career. The person on the other side was a gentleman by the name of Jim Lee, who grew up in China, studied in Australia and the US. And he just taught me the ropes. It was my first job with such intense customer interface. And we did a massive business in China over the next 2 years from scratch, where no mobile phones were sold in China. We actually built no smartphones were actually sold in China. We built up the smartphone market and took it together. I was a very junior guy. I worked with some of the most capable people I ever worked with, and it was the best learning exercise.
Well, I suppose you were instrumental into growing one of the biggest smartphone markets in the world then, I suppose, because I
was a small cog. And as my life's mission is, I went there and I didn't make things worse.
So you left Nokia then, and you had it looks like you were involved with a couple of startups. You did some advisory work, and then obviously you set up Prowler in 2016. So can you talk us through that period between Nokia and Prowler, and the businesses you worked on, just in a nutshell, and sort of what you learned from that experience? Because it looks like you sort of become sort of a bit more. You obviously had an itch to do an entrepreneurial thing and set up a company and all that kind of thing. So what started that, and talk us through that sort of part of your career?
So I think a key aspect out here is that there are people who have a very clear career goals. They have a 5-year plan, or and so on and so forth about their lives. I have to be honest, I've never had one. Right. So I think it's if you've ever read this book, The Range, which is by David Epstein, I believe.
Is it called The Range?
I've always been. I'm sorry.
Did you say The Range? Is that what?
Yeah. The Range is the book. It's actually written by David Epstein, and I think it's really about talking about how the difference and the advantages of being a generalist and not having a big plan, but really learning and adapting as life goes on.
Yeah.
So I've never had that sort of a career goal. When I joined HP as an engineer, my ambition was to retire as a senior engineer, because I was just looking at the next thing in front of me. And leaving Nokia was when I was in corporate strategy in New York, and I just knew that corporate strategy wasn't my thing. I was more of a hands-on guy. So I joined a startup in London. It was somebody else's startup. Through that journey, somehow took me back to Nokia for the second time in Berlin. Where what I was really trying to do was do things that really interested me. And I moved, I never had this vertical a career ladder, which a lot of people have. For me, it was just interest. If it interested me, I did it. And, I was very lucky that I managed to find things of interest and be able to convince people to basically pay me a salary for doing it. And the second time when I joined Nokia, that's where I got quite involved with the automotive industry. And I sort of started the whole group to work on the automotive side in Berlin because I found an opportunity. And also there was a bit of a selfish motive because I've always been very passionate about cars. So I always wanted to go to a car show, like a trade show. So I ended up with that and, just built the whole business around. And while the business was being built up, I saw more opportunities. And I tried to convince the Nokia management that, we should go after this. There's a big business, this entire connected car. What effectively is now the Apple CarPlay, Android Auto. We built something very similar. called terminal mode, and the idea being that all Nokia phones would be able to connect to the dashboards of the cars and so on and so forth. But it was all based on the premise that Nokia would sell a lot of phones, but then Nokia had a separate problem with its phone business, and because there were no phones, that technology did not take off. But because of all the Nokia's burning platform problems it was having at that particular time, there was not money to go in this venture, and I felt very passionate about it. So our daughter had just been born, and I asked my wife while we were living in Berlin that, I'm really passionate, can I try and do something about it? I had never been an entrepreneur. I had no plans to be an entrepreneur. I just had a friend, Yashi Zahia, who's the CEO of Policy Bazaar. I called him up and I said, Yashi, I'm very frustrated and so on and so forth. Yashi said, why don't you start your own company? I said, oh, bloody hell, how did you start your own company? And through him, with some conversations, we started to just, kind of figure out things from first principles. One of the people I worked with at Nokia convinced him, and we jointly left Nokia and started my first startup, Cleon, which was focused on the entire connected car thing in 2010. Now, as a first-time entrepreneur, and as I told you, I've never had a grand plan, so I only learn by doing. So anything that can go wrong did go wrong, but we learned a lot, and we had a good product. And I guess the big problem or the big part where we hit a situation where it was very hard to recover from was this Fukushima earthquake, where we've been working with a customer for over 12 months for a deal. It was a $9 million deal. And the day of signing the deal was the day of the Fukushima earthquake. And the customer was in Fukushima, in Iwaki, where actually just 40 kilometers away from the nuclear station.
I remember that, yeah.
And, if my daughter hadn't been one at that time, I would be in Fukushima at that time, because I was part of the negotiations, and, but you learn a lot, right? So then one thing leads to another. You have no money. You have to go to the bank, take personal securities, scramble for investors. And through some contacts, we met some investors. I won't go into too much detail, but let's put it this way. They were not like-minded investors. So one thing led to another, and 3.5 years after starting the company, I had to close it down. And that was a very painful experience, right? So you've invested a lot on it personally. My family members had invested their personal money and so on and so forth. And it was hard. And I think we had almost 70 staff at that time. And, when things go badly, a lot of, blame game starts, and, finger pointing and so on and so forth. So it's a tough time. And you really start to question yourself, your own basically kind of motivations, why you're doing it. So it's a time to really sort of dig deep inside. What do you really want to do? And that was the other, reset, because Cleon had taken me to back to Singapore. And after 2 years again in Singapore, it was a reminder that I still didn't like hot and humid weather. My wife, being from Finland, didn't adapt very well to the hot and humid weather because she's from Lapland. And we had a young daughter, so we decided to move back to Europe. And the question was where? And I had been to Cambridge once in '99, and I thought it was a great place. And according to Wikipedia, it said that at any given time, there were around 1,200 startups in Cambridge. I also knew it was very academic.
Yeah.
So I like deep science. I like deep tech. I have commercial experience and have done bits and pieces. There is a likelihood that people with my kind of skills are likely to be in short supply in a place like Cambridge, because I also could have moved to the Silicon Valley, but Silicon Valley is full of people like me, right?
Yeah.
So I have no advantage to kind of bestow. In Hindi, we have a saying, a one-eyed person is a king among blind people, right? So I didn't have to be the world's best development person, but I just had to be marginally better than like people in Cambridge, and maybe I had a value to add, right?
Maybe, yeah. Certainly on the commercial side, because there'll be a lot of very smart engineers and things in Cambridge for sure. There'd be good commercial people as well, but like you said, it's the supply and demand curve, isn't it? They must have a demand for commercial people with technical knowledge, So
absolutely. I think so. On the 23rd of January 2014, I, with my family, a young daughter who was a few months shy of being 4 years old, landed in Cambridge, where we did not know anybody, nobody at all. And well, got into a temporary flat, were waiting for our container to be shipped and all that other stuff, living out of a suitcase for the next few months. And so I could just send emails and call people. I must have spoken to 70 odd people, gone to any of the network events. And that's where I got introduced to Blaze Thompson and Steve Young, who were academics who were trying to spin out a company called Vocal IQ from Cambridge. And they were talking about something called machine learning and AI. This is kind of February 2014.
Yeah.
I had no clue what they were talking about. But what they were saying remotely, I thought had applications in the automotive. And I asked them to send me their thesis and their papers so I could understand what the hell they were talking about. So I read through the thesis and I probably understood 5 or 10%, but I understood enough that, given my own technical background, that, okay, this is something, if it really works the way they are saying, it could be quite useful with some of the customers I've worked with in the past. So I joined them. And at that time, I had also gotten some real job offers with real money. But my wife, again, said that, okay, work with them for 6 months. Looks interesting. You're clearly passionate. And if they close their funding, then, of course, I would get paid. But if they don't close their funding, then you can go and look for or go to like normal jobs.
Yeah.
Have it. They closed their funding a few months later, actually the end of July. So I started to work with them in February, but I got paid in July, which was good, nice to get paid. But the best thing that happened there was one of the investors that they were talking to invest in that company was a certain Herman Hauser, who is a very big name in tech. And I obviously didn't know who Herman was. I Googled after I met him, and I realized he's obviously a very important man who started Amadeus Capital Partners and was one of the co-founders of ARM and so on and so forth. So built up that company with Blaze and Steve to about 20 people in 14 months. And then we got acquired by Apple. And that obviously turned out to be quite lucrative for myself and, of course, Vocal IQ's founders. That gave me the introduction to machine learning, AI, and what it could do. And that's also where I met my co-founder, Dongo Kim. So that was really the foundation of me coming to Cambridge, of within 18 months of not knowing how to spell artificial intelligence, having worked with one, sold the business, and started another one.
Wow, that's an amazing story. So in how long, sorry, was that period? In 18 months?
It was 18 months from the time 14 months from the time we closed the funding, 18 months from the time I came to Cambridge.
And who did you say you sold the business to?
To Apple.
To Apple, wow, okay. That's incredible. Wow, so you had a very, very successful start to your entrepreneurial career then, I suppose. So
yeah, and as I said, the first one didn't go well. Cleon was a complete disaster. Vocal IQ turned out very well, right? So yeah.
So what did you in terms of you had a disaster, as you said, you had a super successful exit. What did you take? Talk us through what lessons you learned from that, and then caused you to set up or to come up with the idea for setting up Prowler.
I think the main thing I learned among everything else, I think 2 things. I think first of all, you have to listen to your gut feeling very strongly, because I think one of the key aspects of entrepreneurship, or at least the kind of entrepreneurship I have done, is working with very early stage technology, very disruptive technologies, that there is very little prior knowledge to look at when making a decision of what to do next, right? Because you try to kind of disrupt. So any previous analyst reports, any old business models, anything that people will come and say, but it's never been done. Yeah, or it doesn't work. That's the thing. I think the key mistakes that, if I have to go back, or the key learnings for me was, I identified key decision points inside Vocal IQ, at Cleon, where I did not really follow my instinct.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And it might be both at the technical level, but also at a personnel level. And also the key thing about building a team is that there has to be the fundamental foundation of a team is trust, right? If there is trust, and I would say trust at a very deep level. If there is trust at a very deep level, you can complement each other, you can learn, and then you don't have to, it just makes the whole thing more efficient and more fluid, and you get to better decisions, and you don't have to really manage the company, right? In the traditional sense of the word, right? And that was a learning experience. Not to say that I did not trust, or there were some people I did not trust at Leon. It just wasn't at that level. It wasn't at that level of very deep,
Yeah.
right? And I sort of worked on that. And also, it was very important to learn that a big part of building trust means that it has to come from all parties. And I myself, as in a leadership role, first have to give trust to be able to receive trust.
Yeah. No, of course.
Right. And so, as Gandhi said, that you have to be the change that you want to see in other people.
Yeah, absolutely. You've got to live the values to.
Yeah.
So that gets, well, that scales beyond you then, doesn't it?
Yeah. So I think to basically get down to the level to build the foundations of the organization on trust, right? To the point that you don't question when people come to work, when they don't come to work, what they do. They have a task, you trust them to do it, right?
Yeah.
You don't monitor people, you don't monitor progress, right? Or you give a task to teams and the teams decide, right? And that builds a very strong foundation of the company, because that helps you to withstand the shocks and the outside difficult times. Because when there is trust and there's outside stress, teams who trust get stronger.
Absolutely.
Right. There's a very interesting book called Anti-Fragile by Taleb. And the whole notion of anti-fragile is to build systems. We all understand what fragile is, right? So something that is fragile, if exerted stress, it breaks, right?
Yeah.
And he has this concept of anti-fragile, which is the opposite of fragile, which means that once subjected to trust, it becomes stronger. So I've always had, and actually what I learned, and while reading Taleb and everything, is how to build teams and organization whose response to stress is to get stronger.
Yeah. Yeah, of course. What doesn't break you makes you stronger, isn't it? I think it's Nietzsche.
And now how to put that at an organizational level. I think that was a key learning, and I think that's what I've tried to do at Proud. If there's one thing I'm singularly proud of, is to be able to build that culture where it is about the teams make the decisions, and to build a culture where I, as a CEO, as the company matures, makes less and less decisions, right? As Ilkka Pananen, who's the CEO of Supercell, puts it, that his goal is to become the world's least powerful CEO.
So does he mean by that then that he doesn't really have to do anything because his team is so good around him that they essentially, he trusts them to, do you know what I mean? He's seeing success in just building something so robust that he's almost making himself redundant.
Yeah, and I guess the CEO's job becomes there to ensure that basically culture stays. So I would say the biggest part of my job is now, when we have gotten to 100 plus staff, is how to ensure that culture that we had around the table when we were 6, 7 in an organization of our size and growing, is that culture still maintained, and how do you facilitate that culture with new people coming in? Because we have good times and difficult times and challenging times in the company all the time. Like, how do you continue to work through that culture when things go great, when things don't go that great? How do you still manage that culture of trust? And of course, not everybody will will like that. A lot of people inherently like to be directed.
Yeah.
But then,
You just need to make sure. I suppose they need to fit in with your culture, don't they? And if
that's
you,
right.
the way I think about it is, if people want to be directed, well, is that the kind of autocratic environment you want in your company? I suppose, you know what I
That's
mean.
right.
You want leaders, not followers. Maybe sometimes, not all companies though. Some companies do need followers. What problems are you trying to solve at the moment, Vishal? What's the kind of what's the biggest? You know, I saw your mission statement. You know, what are you trying to get right? What's wrong out there that you guys can solve?
Yeah. So one of the key focuses of us was in how to build an AI system that would enable large enterprises to make better decisions under uncertainty.
Yeah.
And so prior to COVID, when we used to go and tell companies that you need to get better at your disaster planning, and so build your systems that are kind of optimal, but at the same time, in case of any disaster, they are also very robust. Some companies understood it, most did not. I think now post-COVID, everybody understands it.
Yeah.
Right? So that's really the core of what we do. We help large enterprises make better decisions and have better allocation of their resources, and also design them in a way that if black swan events were to hit, they are able to simulate the impact of those black swan events on the companies, so that to make sure that they have all the elements in place to not go under during a black swan event.
Right, which is what we're in right now, I suppose, isn't it?
Exactly. Exactly. So from a supply chain perspective, and you know, on a daily basis, as everybody's talking about COVID recovery, so our customers, or at least some of our customers, on a daily, weekly basis, they have to make decisions on how much capacity they need to hedge, whether on trucks, whether on ships, in the next week, in anticipation of a recovery.
Yes.
Right. So those are real dollars behind those decisions,
Mm.
and there is real impact behind those decisions, and that's what we are, helping our companies decide. And again, being tested against some of the best systems in the world, so we are actually performing very well.
Yeah, I think I've said this on a couple of podcasts recently. I think what the change that is happening now is not really change. It was change that was going to happen anyway. It's just being accelerated by this current situation. Would you agree with that? And how do you think? Let's talk about this in the context of your team as well. Sorry to just give it a double edge. How are you managing to keep your teams productive, creative, engaged through this kind of complete remote working period?
Yeah, I think a very good question. So I think one of the strengths of our team has been its diversity. We have 27 different nationalities where people have had very different experiences coming from different worlds. So that gave us a pretty unique edge where, when this whole COVID situation was unfolding in China, sort of December onwards, and even though it wasn't a big news in the press, but we as a company, because of our experiences and because a lot of us speak multiple languages, and we just follow news channels from very different world, we were already like, guys, why isn't people doing anything here? So in the beginning of February, we started to plan for it and kind of test our systems, so that if we had to work from home, all our systems would work and all our customers were supported seamlessly.
Yeah.
So we went into a remote working from home, and we stopped going to the office much before the government's official kind of a lockdown came. We were totally prepared, right? And we had communicated to the customers everything. And of course, there were some people in the organization asking if you were overreacting. We said no. I don't think the government's reacting, fast enough. So yeah. So by the time the whole lockdown came, we were already working remotely, and I think that sort of, in a way, built more trust within the company, within the teams.
Mm.
And I said, your question about motivation, I think that's very much related to the fact that because we are not a top-down company, right? Because we hire people who don't require too much management, and these are the people who have a specific mindset of taking initiative and driving things forward. So in an interesting way, the productivity of the company has gone up since we started to work remotely, mostly. And that's also partly down to the fact that it took time for people to adapt, but people have adapted to the new ways of working. Teams have reconfigured themselves. We all know the job that needs to be done from the customer's perspective, and the staff has come up with some really good ideas on how to rejig our operational processes to work remotely.
Yeah,
I would have to say most of these ideas came from me or my management team. Actually, they did it. Most of them came from the company.
Yeah. I think as an AI company, you are probably considerably well set up to do remote working, aren't you? Okay, let's end up this one then, Vishal. I know you're a busy chap and you've got lots to do. What advice would you give to technology team leaders, business owners, entrepreneurs who are running a company through this extremely challenging period? What sort of snippet of advice would you give to business leaders right now?
I think I would say that read the book Anti-Fragile. Try to build organizations that are anti-fragile. And I would say, follow the sort of advice of Ilkka Pananen from Supercell. Try to be the least powerful CEO in the world, and your organization will do very well.
I love that one. That's brilliant. Vishal, you've been a brilliant guest. Thank you so much. I've really enjoyed this conversation. And I really appreciate you coming on the show. So thank you so much. And good luck with all your future endeavours and the rest of the lockdown. I'm sure we'll be out of lockdown soon, so hopefully we'll go back to normal soon. All the best.
Thanks, Gareth. It was fantastic speaking to you. Keep in touch.